My name is Dr. Michael Brown, and this is 3 Words, a bite-sized podcast about the simple and yet very strategic choices that we can all make in order to become, as we often say, fully alive. Today in the studio is a common guest here on 3 Words, Casey Greenawalt, and we have a conversation that seems a little bit provocative, but I think you'll really enjoy it. The 3 words, don't be offended, shut your mouth. Casey will unpack for us, as he does with wisdom and with humor and with insight, what it means to be a better listener, at times to simply be quiet and not have to talk all the time. Regardless of whether you find yourself to be a talker or a not talker, you want to listen to this episode. It is truly amazing. Casey Greenawalt, young DMB coach, man bun.
Am I still young? You keep saying that. It's been 3 years.
You are young because you're the youngest on the team and you got that cool man bun going on. So all that to say, most people don't know who you are. I mean, I know who you are. Several people who have listened to so many of the podcasts that you've done know who you are, but fill us in. Those who've not met or seen Casey, who are you?
I am Casey. It is I. I've been hanging out with you for how long? I don't know, like 10 years. I think the first time I met you was like 10 years ago.
We'll go with a decade.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I'm just here trying to live my best life and make good choices, but sometimes I don't. So we're here talking about how to do a better job.
Well, what do you do? What's your career? What do you're married?
So my wife is a wedding photographer and we run a business together. She's extremely talented. Jenna Greenawalt Photography, shameless plug. Maybe we can put that somewhere.
She was on my podcast.
She was on the podcast.
You are enough.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, she was. So we do that. And then I work a little part-time job in the tech world as well, which is super fun. So I get to stay up to date on all the tech world things as well and hang out with people. So,
well, I was mentioning to you even off camera that one of my favorite episodes that I recommend to people all over the globe is, I believe, episode 71, Design Your Day.
Is that the exact number?
I think it is number 71. So obviously when the script comes up, you'll see the real truth. But I feel like we've had some really great conversations very early on in our 3 Words podcast world. And here you are, you're still around. And probably, I would presume, this might be the most provocative 3 words that we've ever done on 3 Words podcast, at least between you and I. Yeah. And they are...
Shut your mouth.
Shut your mouth.
I love this conversation because you and I interrupt each other all the time and it's my favorite. And I think this conversation is about that. Like,
for the record, you interrupt me because I'm actually the host, so I can't interrupt you.
That's not fair.
So why is this important to you?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. I think the art of interpersonal communication is very important. The ability to have a conversation. But beyond that, the ability to create and maintain important, fruitful relationships in our lives with our friends, with our family members, our partners. And I think a pivotal keystone of that is the ability to listen really well and be okay with your thought, your feeling, your whatever it is, not being expressed at the very moment, but stopping and listening and trying to really understand what someone else is saying and what they feel in conversation.
I appreciate that. In fact, I've actually said to people that I'm in conversation with, I like silence in conversation. When someone is actually pausing long enough to gather a response, tells me that when I was talking, they actually were present with me. They were really listening. If someone responds immediately right over top of me as I'm literally taking a breath with their thought, it makes me question at times, Casey, if they have been listening to me and if they've actually been present with me. And so I actually like when we're having particularly a deeper conversation, if I'm having a really meaningful conversation with someone about personal things, if there's a little bit of a pause and you could see them kind of thinking in response to what I just said and then responding, I feel heard and I feel cared for.
Yeah, I think in the more meaningful conversations, that's particularly really important. When, whether it's with your partner or family member, I think when you are talking about something maybe introspective on your own life or a feeling or something you're upset about, we can be really quick to give our thought and our opinion and our feelings about things because we want to be understood, right? We want the other person to understand and believe our feeling. I've recently been going to therapy, which I really love, so everyone should go. It's great. One of the things she said to me the other day was, you don't have to believe or don't have to understand the feeling, but you need to believe it. And I thought that was really helpful for me because I think that goes into listening is like, I don't need to know how you got to where you are necessarily because my brain might not take the same path. But if I really listen to you, I want to believe what you're saying. You said you feel this way. And I believe you. I believe that you feel that way. And so what are we going to do about it? Or now I can take a step in understanding it a little bit more when I believe that you truly felt that way. I think that's a pivotal part to listening.
I'm going to hit pause in this conversation right now with Casey to simply invite you to share this episode with a friend. It's thoughtful and it will deepen your relationship with people you care most about. Now back to the conversation. Casey, I love that you use this word over and over again, understanding, because obviously our deepest need is to be understood, but we cannot experience an understanding or feel understood if I'm with someone who's not really listening to me. One of the phrases I've used a lot, and I think we've even traveled together and spoken about some of these things, is what does it mean to look closely and listen carefully at the same time, to be present with someone, to listen very carefully, to actually really work hard at that. It's easier to talk. It's easier just to keep talking and talking and talking and talking. I mean, we've been in situations, haven't we, where it's like, I'm sitting in this environment where we've been together for maybe an hour and no one's asking questions.
Yeah.
They're just talking over each other and no one's taking time to say, tell me about, or I'm curious about, I think understanding and relationships are built around this idea of understanding, which comes from shutting your mouth.
One of the things I hear often from just people is like making friends is really hard. We've talked about that on this podcast before, but I think that's a big part of it is when we get to know someone, the more questions you ask to that person, the more you're going to learn about them. It's pretty simple. So I think the fear we have going into that often is we have to fill the space with conversation, when in reality, some of the most interesting people in the room are the people who just don't talk much. We want to learn more from them. It's almost counterintuitive, but when you're silent, you ask questions. It's not about just being quiet and not saying anything, right? Ask questions, reiterate what you're hearing the person say. So what I'm hearing you say is X, Y, and Z. There's strategies to this. It's like the art of interpersonal communication. You have to be aware of how the other person is receiving. Even on this podcast, we do it, right? Like I've been talking for a little while. So at some point you're going to start talking and respond to what I'm saying. You have to be aware, and you also have to be present and introspective all at the same time. So it is an art.
Well, and you're describing as well what has become kind of a really interesting and important topic within business and in life in general is this idea of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
How do my comments and how do my interactions with you make you feel, and being aware and being able to pick up on the cues of how you're feeling and how you're experiencing our conversation. And you can be talking all the time, and sometimes people are looking at you like they're making it very clear, like you're just talking, but we're not emotionally intelligent enough to even realize that we're just not present and we're just running over the conversation. And obviously we're talking in the context at this point so far in our conversation about interpersonal relationships. But I want to take this shut your mouth idea and maybe a few other places, if I may, just as I'm sitting here listening, that are coming to mind. The first of which, particularly in this politically divisive world, we feel like we need to make a comment and we need to make a statement and we need to make a point and we need to say this and say this and we need to, man, I wish sometimes people would just shut up.
I agree.
Like if I may, and just literally be quiet and just let people have different opinions and let people think different things. And we actually talked about this in one of our early episodes, consider different perspectives.
Right.
The podcast was not challenge different perspectives. The podcast was consider different perspectives, which presumes listening, which presumes leaning in and wanting to be a learner and not an expert on every possible topic. So, I think maybe the question would be, if you're in the situation where you're like, is it time to speak? Is it time to offer my opinion? Is this words that I'm going to use? Is the comments I'm going to make? Is the feedback I'm going to give? Is it going to be combative or is it going to be constructive? Is it going to be beneficial or is it going to hurt the environment or hurt the person? So often when we're just always talking and always needing to make a point. We're often not thinking about those things.
Yeah. I think when it comes to those maybe more divisive thoughts or beliefs that we may have, we often want our side and point to be heard so deeply because that helps us feel validated in our thought when we can articulate it and say it. When I think growth is going to take place when you stop and go, hey, I believe or think in terms of A. I know that you believe or think in terms of B. Help me understand how you got there. Have you always thought that way? Okay, so what you're telling me is that from an early age, that was something you always thought and always believed. So have you ever considered otherwise, or why don't you think this thought is valid? Those are questions that pull apart and try to understand someone at a deeper level that you'll never get to if you just yell and give your 2 cents. It's like, I hate the social media world we live in a lot of ways. I love it. I think it's cool. It helps my wife's business flourish and it's amazing. People can create art and it goes out there, but in a lot of ways, we don't listen on it. We just want to give our thoughts and our 2 cents so that way we can feel validated in our belief when validating your belief isn't growing or challenging you in any way.
Well, and if our value is to be right all the time, we can choose being right or being in relationship.
Right.
You don't get to be right all the time and be in relationship with people. And people who always have to be right, I think you'll notice they rarely shut their mouth. And they have so much to say and so many opinions. But probably the deep root of that is insecurity. That I need to, I'm not sure. So I just need to overrun the conversation. I need to control the conversation. I need to speak first, get my point across first, because we're insecure. We're not quite sure. We don't like this world in which we live in right now where there's uncertainty. We want to know, is this actually right? And the question isn't always right or wrong. You know?
I feel like a lot of the conversation around like being right or wrong and listening to other perspectives, it feels very toxic in our culture. And I think if we all stop and have conversations like this, where we talk about the value of listening to people, I mean, like in a practical sense, I don't know, like a takeaway, maybe, if you will, if you're at home listening, like gather your friends and ask them, like, am I a good listener? Like, why or why not? I would say some of my friends maybe say I'm not a great listener sometimes. But I don't know. I think that's a good step to really start to reflect on the beliefs and the thoughts that I have. Do I just spit them out loud all the time? Or do I actually ask the people in my life good questions to get to know their perspective on these things? And that can go for a broad variety range of things, your personal development, your beliefs, your whatever it may be, right? Just good, healthy dialogue, ultimately, I think, is what contributes to growth as human beings.
And I think we probably all think, me included, that we're probably better listeners than we actually are. And so to actually solicit feedback from other people and say, how do you experience me when we're in conversation?
Yeah, that's we've talked about that before. How do you experience me? Yeah. I heard someone say that again the other day when I was at work. And I love that phrase, like, how do you experience me? Because it makes you stop. Even this conversation is making me go, oh, I can think back to the other day and I dominated that conversation and I probably should have shut up a little bit more. Yeah.
Well, and again, we chose the word "shut your mouth," but it could have been phrased a variety of ways. Sure. Be a better listener, which has 4 words. We can't have a 4 words podcast, but I mean, what are 3 words? Active listening matters. But all that to say, I think it's about listening. It's about taking time to be in the presence of other people and giving people space to actually formulate their thoughts, to ask good questions, as we're talking about. One of the things I just have to talk about it because I've been talking about it a ton. One of our defaults in culture is complaining. And I've been talking a lot about this idea of complaining, because we're talking about shutting your mouth. So typically when people are feeling nervous in social settings or even not sure how to have conversations or how to bond with people, we're trying to bond with people over complaining.
Oh my gosh,
this thing's bad, or this and this and this. And so, one of the things I said recently, it's like we have to say something like, oh yeah, it's hot, or I'm exhausted, or this work. Like, complaining is both cancerous and contagious. So it begins to kind of spread. But I actually have been saying this almost, I don't want to say every public speaking event I've been in, but when I'm talking about culture and I'm talking about different components of culture and different things that create toxic culture, we're going to talk about complaining.
Sure.
And so one of the things I've been saying recently is, if you are someone here in the room who is always complaining and always has something negative to say, I'm promising you right now, I'm going to give you a gift. And the gift is this: I'm going to share with you what none of your friends are ever going to say, but they really wish you knew. And that is, shut your mouth. So it's funny, when I heard "shut your mouth" was going to be our podcast.
Stop complaining.
Well, because it's like people it just gets exhausting.
I totally agree with that.
But that's kind of our default, right? So sometimes think about, what are the fillers I'm using to fill in the space that whereas I just think silence is okay. It's okay just to sit quietly with someone. And
silence or gratitude, right? I feel like that's another, or just asking people, like in the terms of being a good listener and shutting your mouth. I have a coworker who's so good at that. He told me something good all the time. And it's a little annoying sometimes, but it's a genuine, like, he really just wants you to think of something positive in that moment. So I think those are good questions to ask people too. Like, what are you looking forward to? What's coming up? What are you excited about? What's good in your life? That being grateful is often a good first step in growth as well.
Yeah. Well, Casey, as always, I want to give you the final word. Obviously, there's listeners, viewers, they've gotten to know you. People who track with us know Casey Greenawalt very well at this point. But obviously, this is an important conversation. It's one that you chose. It's one that was near and dear to your heart. So you get the final word, words of encouragement, challenge to our listeners and viewers.
Yeah, I think the first step to any growth is to be introspective and ask yourself, like, how am I doing here? And then to maybe ask some of your closest friends or family, like, am I a good listener? Am I someone who asks good questions and listens to your answer and doesn't seek to be understood, but seeks to understand first, all the context of this conversation. And then after you get some feedback from people and really think about it yourself, journal, whatever. A good next step is just to take it one step at a time. The next conversation you have, just stop talking so much and ask some good questions. I also would say this, there's some really good friendships I have in my life that we interrupt each other. Like that's part of the banter and the conversation. And it's not that it's wrong all the time. It's not always wrong to talk and to be someone who has lots of words to say, because I tend to be that kind of person. But just be aware, be really aware. The more emotional intelligence, right? Growing in that is just one conversation, one interaction at a time. Don't be hard on yourself, get better every single time. Maybe you look back at it and you're like, I talked way too much there. Just stop, go back and go, next time I'm going to ask more questions. Next time I'm going to deeply understand this person just a little bit more than I did last time. So we can always get better, just one step at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself. Don't tear yourself down. That's not going to be helpful for anybody. Just take the next step as it comes and you got this.
Wow. Gracious, wise, thoughtful, insightful as always, Casey. Thanks for being here with me today.
Appreciate you.
Just so you know, we do not take for granted here at 3 Words Podcast that you are tracking with us every other week, listening to new episodes, spending time with us on your commute or maybe at home. We really appreciate your partnership with us and love having you a part of our community. Would you also consider subscribing to our monthly newsletter? It's free, new content, fresh content, insights you maybe never will hear on this particular podcast, but they're in a digital newsletter and you can subscribe at dmbcoaching.com/subscribe. And then we can continue to go deeper with you and provide more resources for you in order for you to become fully alive. Thanks so much for being with us again today, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.